It's Monday here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We are joined by Ray Fittipaldo as we recap what we saw in the first week of practice and what everyone's excited about. The pads finally go on for some live hitting on Tuesday at Steelers training camp. We break down all of that, what we see and more here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of the Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our Pittsburgh sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, they have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. It's the best bar in Pittsburgh. We'll have more on them later. But we got to talk about training camp here, Ray. You and I were out in the hot sun in Latrobe. We've been braving it for a week now. We got to see guys in football in shorts. They were still kind of getting through things. But before we get into the guys who are going to be hitting, I want to talk about the quarterback situation with you. Our guy, Jerry Dulac, of course, reported sources that Russell Wilson's injury that's kept him out of the first week of camp is not serious. He's been practicing, in his own kind of space and not doing anything too serious. He's going to practice for his first day on Tuesday when the pads go on. What's your read as far as how Justin Fields has performed in his stead, and if he's either made some ground or if he's kind of just shown the things that Tom Arth is going to need to help him work with as the QB coach?
Yeah, I thought it was probably up and down for Justin Fields the first four practices. And again, Chris, they're unpadded, but I think for quarterbacks, you do get to see a lot of what they have to do. Their reads, their arm strength, their chemistry with the receivers. Until yesterday, he really struggled in 7 shots. The drill that they open practice with, you get, 7 plays from the 2-yard line. And, Justin Fields was I think 2 for 10 passing the first couple of days. And then he finally had a decent day yesterday. I think he was 1 for 3 and he ran one in. So a little bit better there. And I think, more of the same when you go 11 on 11 in the middle of the field. He threw a pick yesterday to Donte Jackson. Probably should have had another pick that was dropped and, sprinkled in. He's had some really good throws too. So, basically everything we heard about Justin Fields, I think, has come to fruition. I think there's a lot of talent there, but I think the coaches really have to work to, get him stabilized, get his feet on the ground to turn him into a bona fide starting quarterback in the NFL.
No, I agree. That's part of the challenge here is trying to get consistency out of Justin Fields. That's where I think it's going to be really interesting to see is how do they get to that point? What's the biggest challenge to get him there to develop that consistency? Because you and I, we can see the development, or we can see the potential in Justin Fields. And when he throws a downfield laser, he is on point. But that's kind of who he was in Chicago, right? He could throw 30-yard bombs that would be amazing. But then you asked him to throw the 5-yard in route and he would miss and it would be tipped and intercepted. And there was just that inconsistency. I think that's just more of what the Steelers saw. And I think what's been allowed to happen is now the Steelers have kind of seen on their own terms, in their own system, hey, these are the things that he's struggling with. Now they can take that to the film room and say, hey, Justin, we need you to work on this. We need you to work on this. And now for me, at least as an observer, now the big thing I'm watching for in Justin Fields is how quickly does he work on these type of things? How quickly does he progress on these types of things? Because you go back and you look at Jordan Love with the Packers. Jordan Love, didn't have some great starts at times, but he rebounded from them. He got better at them. And that's what the good quarterbacks in this league do. So Justin Fields had time for that, do that in Chicago. It didn't work out there. The Steelers are trying to see on their own terms, can it happen there? I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. But Russell Wilson getting back in there, Ray, the offense finally won its first 7 shots of the summer on Sunday. So it's 3-1 defensively. But none of those 7 shots have featured Russell Wilson. And that's where I think a lot of the differences are going to come this year with the Steelers at quarterback, is a consistent presence, a guy who knows how to manage the game. What are your expectations for how Russell Wilson will look in practice, especially with the pads go on? Because we talked to, I think it was Troy Fautanu, and he said, like, oh, we're waiting. We can't wait to run the ball on people.
Yeah. Russ is known the last couple of years for being really good in the red zone. So I definitely think that the offense will, get a boost there. We should mention Kyle Allen, actually, in 7 shots, the number 3 quarterback, has been really good.
Yeah, he has been.
He's kind of kept that score kind of close on a couple of occasions. He threw 2 touchdowns yesterday that helped them win that deal. So, I think most of the struggles with the 7 shots has been more on Justin than Kyle. But, getting back to Russ, he has that veteran feel about him. He has that presence about him. And, George Pickens talked the other day, and he basically said, we're just waiting on Russ to get back now. So I think there's an expectation, within that offensive unit that once Russ does come back, maybe the offense can start clicking on all cylinders. I thought just overall, if we talk about the offense, not just the quarterback situation, really inconsistent, good moments and bad moments, a lot of pre-snap penalties from the young offensive line. They got to clean that up. And yet again, you see flashes where, they'll block something up perfectly like they did yesterday when Troy Fautanu did a nice job against TJ Watt, and then Fields throws a touchdown pass to Scotty Miller. So there's good moments, there's bad moments. I think you're going to have that when you have a young offense, and I think that goes for the quarterback situation as well when you're talking about Justin Fields improving.
Yeah, I think that there's the offense is looking for some form of consistency, something to base itself in so that they can have sort of a floor as far as performance. And I think that's the problem, is that they've had a high ceiling but also a really low floor with Justin Fields. And so now it's kind of like with Russell Wilson going in, can they get a higher floor and just have that consistent production? Because again, it's going to be really interesting. The whole base of this team is supposed to be off the balance of being able to run the football and run the football well. And I think that's going to be a big component here with this offensive line, what we've seen from them with the running backs that they use. And we kind of haven't had a chance to see that much yet because the pads haven't been on and they can't really run block the defense, can't really go tackle guys. Those are the things we're going to be interested to see in the coming week here as the pads go on here. But I also want to talk to you, Ray, about some of the other guys that have been going at it that we've been able to at least get a better feel for, and that's the wide receivers and the DBs. There have been some of the young DBs and some of the new DBs that have really stood out. Also, some of the receivers that have stood out. I want to talk to you about them next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, they have over 500 different available beers, 300 of those beers from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. And every day, they're switching new ones in and out so that you can get a new experience every single time you go for beers at Mike's Beer Bar. Whether you're going to get a flight, you're going to get a big draft, or you're going for dinner, Mike's Beer Bar has every part of the experience that you need. It's right across the street from PNC Park. You can go there before, during, after Pirates games. You could go there to watch the Paris Olympics right now. They have over 20 television screens, so you can always have your eyes on any sporting event that's going on. Mike's Beer Bar is a great place to go. I go there all the time and have a great time. You can also get amazing food like their Steak on a Stone, where you get your choice cut of steak brought to you on a heated stone, and then all you have to do is cut a piece off, press it into that stone, and you choose how well done you want every single bite. It is the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. Go to Mike's Beer Bar today, and when you get there, tell them Chris sent you. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's get into what we've seen from some wide receivers and DBs over the first week. Notably, on the first day at camp, Donte Jackson made his presence felt. He was guarding George Pickens. He was guarding anyone that was in front of him, and he looked very solid. And so he broke up passes. You talked about he got an interception yesterday. I think that there was a lot of nervousness about would he be able to compete at the NFL level after the way that things went for him on his last team. But as I've been saying, I think the biggest thing was he didn't need to be the Steelers' number one guy all the time. There might be times where he takes on opposing number one wide receivers, but taking the sole role of being that top level corner, that may not be his MO. I think that's what Joey Porter Jr. is for. But having him as a mix with another guy like Joey Porter Jr., I think that could put him in a really good position to succeed. And I think at least without the pads on, he looked pretty good in our first chance to view him.
Yeah, if people can think back to last summer, Chris, we got George Pickens versus Joey Porter Jr. almost every single day in camp. And, we didn't get that the first week with Pickens and Jackson, but we got that the first couple of days. And, for me at least, it solidified, the thought that, maybe this guy can be a solid number two for you. I think we all know that Joey Porter Jr. is projected to be that number one guy. Donte Jackson is a guy they're just looking to come in and be a solid two. They really didn't have that last year. Patrick Peterson getting older, didn't have the wheels anymore. And, they took a flyer on him late in his career, and it didn't work out. Donte Jackson is younger, doesn't quite have the pedigree of a Patrick Peterson, but he's still got wheels. If you watch him, Chris, he could still run down the field with George Pickens and all the other receivers. So I feel a little bit better about that, about the secondary after the first week of camp. We'll see what happens here once the preseason games start in about 10 days or so. But, yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with how Donte Jackson played.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really solid. And another cornerback that I thought stood out was Beanie Bishop, who seems, at least for now, to be the Steelers' top slot cornerback option. Now, we've seen Deshaun Elliott line up in the slot. We know Cam Sutton is around, but we haven't seen him line up in that slot position too much. And I wonder if part of that is they kind of know what Cam Sutton is and can do, and this is their chance to see more of Beanie Bishop play. What have you thought of Beanie Bishop and how he stood out in the first couple of days of camp?
Yeah, he doesn't look out of place. And I think sometimes when you have an undrafted free agent, a guy who was overlooked in the draft process, you think there are low expectations, right? But I think Beanie Bishop, a 6-year college guy, 4 years at Western Kentucky, spent a year at Minnesota before he finished up at West Virginia. He can run with these guys. He's a smaller corner, but he's shown an ability to stick by, guys like Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson, some of the guys he's been going up against in training camp. Now, just because he's running with the ones in the first week of camp doesn't mean he's going to get the start against the Texans, in about 10 days or so, or that he'll even be a serious option once the season starts. But I think what this points to is he's the first guy they want to look at. They want to see what he can handle. If they don't like what they see, say, a week or two from now, then they can go in, a different direction. Maybe there's somebody else on the roster they'll take a look at. Maybe they'll go back outside and see if there's a guy that they can pick up. But, yeah, for right now, Beanie Bishop is the guy that they're focused on, and I think he had a solid first week as well.
Now, I wanted to take another look back at George Pickens real quick. We got a chance to talk to him, I believe, on Saturday, I think it was. And it was something that we talked about on Friday was, the first day of practice, there was a little bit back and forth of Zach Azzanni. I got the chance to ask him about Zach Azzanni. And by the way, you can see that interview on Post-Gazette Sports on our YouTube page. So go check that out if you want to see us talking to him and how he responded in person. But I felt like there might have been a little bit of tension at first, but I think that at least George has put it behind him for now with Zach Azzanni. And I've seen several times now where Azzanni's coaching him up and he responds to it well and he sort of takes it in stride. And I also think that Azzanni seems to be having a good impact on the rest of the receiving core. Calvin Austin that's expressed a lot of appreciation for him, as has Roman Wilson, who has looked better and better every single day at camp. And I'll even say has looked good as a rookie receiver in camp. And I think he's entered himself into the wide receiver 2 conversation, not saying that he's won that job, but I think that with the unsolidified situation that is wide receiver 2, I think that he's now at least in play for that.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at, what Roman Wilson has done here in the first week of camp. He's showing really nice body control on the sidelines, Chris. And I don't think the Steelers are counting on him to come in be that number 2 right away, but I think definitely down the road, he has the qualities to be that really good possession receiver that you need opposite a guy like George Pickens or anybody else who's going to be that big play receiver for you down the road. So, I thought the first week of camp was really good for Roman Wilson. I think there's a lot more potential to tap into. I thought Van Jefferson had a solid first week. We got to talk to him, I think, on Saturday as well. I think Calvin Austin has been good. We've said that about Calvin Austin a lot, during camps. And, now we have to see him progress into the regular season and be that productive player, once the game starts for real. But, number 2 receiver is going to be a huge topic of conversation. None of those guys were bad, I don't think, this week. I think they all had their good moments. Now it's all about, okay, who is actually going to step up and be that number 2? Who can, step up and sort of take hold of that job? And I don't think we have an answer to that quite yet. But, again, we still have 3 weeks to go up here before any of that stuff has to be decided.
Absolutely. And back on George, I think that it's going to be interesting because George also said he wants to lead by example. And I get the impression he doesn't want to be a vocal leader per se. But I think that there's still a potential for him to be able to work. The Steelers want this guy to work out. I think they put themselves in a position where it's like, hey, they haven't committed a whole lot of money either way for next season for future contracts. So I think they're kind of in a position where if George Pickens doesn't work out, they'll find somebody who does, either in the trade market or wherever else. But I think that he at least has looked, looked like the number one. Look like a number 1 wide receiver, in practices. And I think it's going to be really interesting the more and more times he goes up against guys, how much does he win, and how polished does he look, because Zach Azzanni is not one to back off his receivers. He's very in their face, on their case, from their footwork. He'll say, run your face through the bleeping ball. He'll get very excited. He'll get very animated about that. And George Pickens even said, hey, my college coach coached like that, so I'm used to this. And I kind of welcome it. So I'll just be interested to see how Pickens continues to handle that. But I think that, based off of what we've seen here, I think it will be a non-issue, at least moving forward. The question will be, how does this group form together, and what does this offense look like when it's actually playing real football?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that George has displayed those number 1 receiving qualities the first week of camp. The question is, Chris, can he execute a block when he's asked to block? Can he execute different routes within the route tree that they need him to do? That's the big question with him. It's not his ability, to go up and be an athlete and to, produce those big plays. I'll say this about Zach Azzanni. We talked about the pre-snap penalties with the young offensive line. This is a young receiving core too. We haven't seen those pre-snap penalties with those guys. So you mentioned it. He is a hard coach. He's in your face. He did it with Roman Wilson throughout OTAs. Roman Wilson talked about that yesterday. He got on Pickens, like you said, the first couple of days of camp. So he's not going to let anyone slide. So, again, small sample size first week, but I think the receivers have been much more disciplined, than the offensive line. And I think that's a good sign, knowing what, the issues were with that group last year, just in terms of effort, blocking, all those sorts of things. People, we don't need to recap it, but Donte Jackson against the Bengals, Pickens against the Colts, all that stuff that happened last year cannot happen again. And I think Azzanni and the rest of that offensive staff are, putting things into place now so that type of stuff does not happen in the future.
I agree entirely. I want to talk to you more about the pads going on, and especially about that with a lot of the rookies that we're looking to actually see more of, and that includes Troy Fautanu, Zach Frazier, Peyton Wilson, who we've seen a bit of, but a big part of what he does is physicality. We'll get to all that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Stick with us. We'll be right back. The North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, so like I said, the pads go on, and this is where we'll finally get to see more of the metal that the Steelers have invested into, and that's the offensive line with Troy Fautanu, with Zach Frazier. We'll also get to see Broderick Jones and see how far he's come along at that position, as well as Peyton Wilson at linebacker. This is where we're going to get to see the Steelers start to embrace that identity that Arthur Smith's been talking about. And a big part of that is these rookies they've invested into. You and I talked about this off camera, and then you talked about this on camera with Jerry. On Sunday, Troy Fautanu got to go up against the ones. He went up against TJ Watt and actually held his own. Now, again, TJ Watt with no pads, just a few times in a practice doesn't mean that he's ready to take on Myles Garrett in the world right now. But it is a good sign that at least he doesn't look like he's in over his head. And I think that's a good sign here. What are the things that you're looking for, telltale signs that you look for from young players when you get a first chance to see them put the pads on at training camp?
Yeah, I mean, I want to see team run. People are going to be focused on backs on backers. That's going to be the big early drill on Tuesday. We'll get to see some violent collisions there, but team run, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren running behind that revamped offensive line. That's what I want to see. We all know Arthur Smith wants to run the football. I think he needs to run the football in order for his offensive game plans to be effective. So that's what I'll be focused on. Number 2, Chris, I want to see more Fautanu versus TJ Watt. I was really impressed with his footwork. He looks so balanced in pass pro. It looks like he's going to be a tough matchup for guys. So I want to see Fautanu versus Watt. I want to see Jones versus Watt. I want to see Highsmith versus all those guys because, eventually Broderick Jones is going to flip to the left side. And I want to see how he goes against the number ones. Other matchups I'm looking forward to, Zach Frazier versus Keanu Benton. That'll be a good one. And then, we might not see a lot of reps from Cam Hayward, but Cam Hayward versus Isaac Seumalo, James Daniels, some of those old vets getting a taste of real football too. It's going to be a very, very physical week up in Latrobe, and I'm looking forward to it.
We haven't had a chance to see much of Zach Frazier yet. He had a bad snap, I think, early in camp. I haven't really noted too many big mistakes from him since. But I feel like this is going to be his real chance to show out a little bit more because, you talked about the team run and getting to see that. But, it's easier to judge the tackles in without the pads on because they at least have the edge rushing protection on pass pro. But center, it's like, just you're calling out the right things, but you can't really evaluate that. And so far, Zach Frazier, he's just been working with second team. To me, these are the days when the pads go on. These are the days he needs to make up ground against a Nate Herbig if he wants to earn a starting spot by week 1. Yeah,
because you got what, Chris? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday this week, and Sunday as well. And then it's a game week the next week. They'll be preparing to play a preseason game the following week. So this first week, really important for Fautanu and Frazier. Those guys have to get on their radar. They have to give those coaches reason to think that they are going to be viable options to start that season opener in Atlanta. I think, based on the way the Steelers do things, I would expect Herbig and Dan Moore both to get the starts against the Texans. And then depending on what happens there with their performance and also Fautanu's and Frazier's performance here over the next 2 weeks, I think that second preseason game, that week before that second preseason game, is where you might see some movement if they do indeed have plans on having one or both of those guys take hold of a starting job. So certainly an important week for Frazier. He is built to be a center. He is stocky. He is strong. And like I said, I'm interested to see how he goes up against guys like Keanu Benton and some of those other interior defensive linemen here this week.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be a lot of focus on that. I also think the interior defensive linemen themselves are going to be very interesting to watch. DeMarvin Leal, Keanu Benton, they are going to be good. They're supposed to be the future. And I have to say, Ray, I've been impressed by Leal, at least how active he's looked without pads on. He's looked quicker. He's looked sharper. I think that part of it is, he's grown into himself a little bit more. He's figured out what works for him. And, that comes with younger defensive linemen when they're brought into the NFL. You've seen that with guys like Stephon Tuitt who have taken time to develop into themselves. But I'm interested to see because there's multiple players the Steelers want to see take really big steps forward in the trenches. And so it's going to be a competition with, with their players on their side of the ball to be able to see who starts or who gets the certain spot on the depth chart. But it's also a competition with the other side at the same time. This is, iron sharpens iron is the phrase, Mike Tomlin always likes to quote. And I think that's absolutely what's about to happen here on Tuesday and Wednesday as they put the pads back on, because you got two sides, both want to be physical. Marvin Leal even said, like, hey, part of the reason he didn't play last year is because they needed to stop the run, and he wasn't good at that. Now he feels like he's better at that. Now's his chance to prove that he is better at that. And if he does, maybe that makes the case for him to get some more playing time this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone knows that this defensive line is aging out. Cam Hayward, 35, Larry Ogunjobi, over 30 years old. And I think everyone expects Keanu Benton to step up and to be that guy. But if they can get Leal, who they invested a third-round pick in as well, if they can get him to play a little bit better, then maybe, the draft next season, you don't have to totally focus on defensive line. Like I think they have to focus on it right now. If you can get Leal to come along and Benton takes that next step like we all think he's going to do, then, that would be good for the Steelers' future defensive line. So, yeah, I agree with you. Huge week coming up here for both the offense and the defensive lines, but there'll be all kinds of storylines, right? Tuesday morning, if Russ is in there with the ones, we're going to be talking about Russell Wilson. So there'll be a lot to look forward to on Wednesday's podcast.
Absolutely. We'll have all that and more here on the North Shore Drive podcast all week long. We're at training camp, getting you ready with everything. Myself, Ray Fittipaldo, Jerry Dulac, Brian Batko. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of those daily updates. We have daily updates from training camp with what happens if you want to see the daily updates, as well as the Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Thanks, Ray, for joining us here. We're going to be back Wednesday with our first reactions to how the first day in pads went, to give you a sense of what's going on there, who's making progress. Stay in tune with all of that with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. Subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube page. We're back Wednesday with more here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.